All right. So we are back live. So picking up on the definition of OpenAI, or a set of definitions, I suppose, being about barriers to access and
Mm,
openness being the opposite of that, something being possible to access, but in many different facets. So we're talking about having the skills to be able to operate something, being
mm,
things being openly published and like findable. And we also talked about um, things being legally allowed to be accessed and used. So, from these different kinds of perspectives, can you think of any examples of AI technologies that you would call open AI?
um, yeah, I think this I might have said this before, but like we probably first have to start with like the access to a computer and internet, right? Like those as an assumptions because they're technologies that require those things. Um, so within that, do you believe, and this is where like the names are going to elude me, but I do believe there are some models or some of the tools that are out there do allow for one to be able to like download, customize, play with, and use. And I feel like those feel closest um, to open. They do require some, but not necessarily a lot of uh, technical learning, but not necessarily language learning. And I think maybe there's a reasonable distinction there of like if one has to learn a language in order to operate or to fix, that feels different than if one just has to figure out like the properties of the system that they have to tweak and adjust because that will be for any type of tool or technology. So I would probably say, so, yeah, if I'm thinking about what we would mean if we're using the term open AI, what will come to mind would be those models that you are now able to download freely and begin to customize and structure based on how you want to use it versus a lot of the ones that are, say, web-based. Um, that would probably be the difference for me.
Mhm. And you mentioned that you've been working on having conversations in the space of generative AI for a while now. I'm
Hmm.
curious, have you participated in any projects or initiatives where there would be a focus, or at least in part, on open AI technologies?
That's not as of yet, but that's actually part of what in this new role I'm carving out space for. And in fact, getting com- separate computer to actually download and really play around with and like maximize some of the open models just to see and understand more of that, the ease of it, how transferable is like how easy is it for others. And I think about that in a very similar to way to uh, before like before smartphones or really in like early 2000s up to about 2010, 2011. If you want to do like if you want to do video editing, you often needed like Camtasia or like these fairly robust tools that you had to like know all of the mechanisms from. And that made it prohibitive, particularly for educators, to actually make video content because it just required a lot more versus like now any faculty member can like share screen, open up Zoom and hit record and do a fairly decent job. So to me it's wanting to play with those tools to figure out where along that continuum of like really really complicated or fairly easy to get up and going and among those open AI tools, those open AI models, like which one feels closer to this end so that I feel like I can more actively share and encourage the use of it.
Mhm. Okay. So if we imagine the most open version of an AI system that could be, so it would have to be easy to use. It's something that is legal to use and can be modified for a number of use cases so people can use it for their own purposes. Um, I guess you can add to the bucket anything else that
Mm.
would fit in the ideal, most open system. With such a system, how do you perceive the role of OpenAI in enhancing education? Could it be used to enhance education?
Yeah, I mean it is inevitably like mm, other tools in that, if we look at it as, you know, where can this help and not this will help. Um, right. So like not just the shiny toy to have the shiny toy, but where are the buckets that feel like this could support meaningful learning in different contexts. I feel there's a lot of opportunities in there. Uh, Obviously creating learning content, creating for those that use it different types of, quizzes and flashcards, different types of assessments, um, be able to help with like the design of the learning experiences, be they synchronous or asynchronous. So, I mean, a lot of the things that people are looking to it now, I think would feel a lot more comfortable, particularly for those faculty who have concerns and angst about, and students as well have concern and angst about, you know, the legal questions around it, the companies and who their funders are, and the environmental costs and stuff. It feels like it presents it helps to address that, and it creates more opportunities for different educators at different levels to have another significant robust tool and like figuring out the learning strategies and approaches in their classrooms, and for students as well as like another tool for them to more easily check their own assumptions or challenge their own learning, or kind of explore in a way uh, that suits their interests. So rather than necessarily just top down learning, really a bit more like opportunity for students to be still within a subject matter, but be able to continue to explore areas that interest them more easily.
Mhm. Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of has an overlap, I guess, between AI that works well and open AI.
Hmm.
Um, but openness helps to address, I guess, trust issues, perhaps, or concerns about
So,
how the system works, what you're allowed to use it for, what you can use it for, things like
hmm.
that. That's interesting. And are there any emerging trends or developments that you know of that you believe would shape or influence the future of openness in AI, whether things become more or less open?
Um, depends that word. Um, you would say, in, um, yeah, some of the copyright stuff being legally settled. Um, Emerging trends in its own its own growing ubiquity. Hmm. In terms of like AI showing up everywhere. it is, if you're online, it's hard now to avoid things that aren't impacted by particularly AI in general, but generative AI. We're seeing this in all our different all the different digital assistants that pop up. It was there before, but there's a level to them that's increasing. I just think about like every time now I open up, you know, a Google product and you've got the little Gemini star there. So I think the ubiquity of it is probably going to also encourage. I think it's going. Do you think the increasing presence of it will also therefore increase some of the more experimentation and figuring out the different versions or like the different iterations of it that then I don't know, I feel like somewhere within there is, as there has been and with other technologies, like we inevitably get these open source platforms or these open source tools. Uh, I think one thing that I see right now is a lot of institutions are very hesitant or have been limited in producing institutional policy that's very clear and intentional about using it, how to use it. And part of the reason of that is because to choose to use it, an institution says, yes, I want to use it. They then actually have to choose a tool for people to be able to use. And if they choose a tool for people to be able to use, it has to be safe. And it has to be safe, they often have to purchase it. Um, and so there's a lot of hesitation because that's a big cost for institutions. Like more likely everybody's going to want it. So I think in some ways it reminds me of like Moodle as a open source learning management system where part of the reason it became so ubiquitous is because it's open source and people can just like take it and they can do their own instance of it. And so I think there's something about that of like AI is everywhere. Institutions are hesitant to uh, basically choose one because then they have to pay for it. And so within that, I think will generate some people in the community creating a version of AI that is close enough to the good models, fairly easy to create a system, fairly easy to customize, but also to create a system structure so that you can have that closed off, so that their institutional members, uh, an institutional can set up an instance and run it with just membership for their faculty, staff, students, etc. So I feel like that might be maybe a little bit more crystal ball, like looking into the crystal ball than it is emerging trends. But I'm just trying to like I think about how other technologies have become ubiquitous and the learning management system structure feels like the most evident one as a point of comparison.
Yeah, makes sense. There's definitely some parallels. And
Hmm.
speaking of parallels, on the looking into the crystal ball, do you also see any challenges in implementing OpenAI in education, but specifically open as opposed to less open systems?
Um, I mean, I think they'll be the same. I mean, some of it is just the concerns around AI, but I think some of it will be the similar concerns around open of like that came with OER, that come with open access, that come with a lot of open source is like there's a maintenance issue, right? So there's still money's being spent in maintaining the model and updating the model. There's a concern of um, who like so much of what OER and open access gets critiqued. It's like, well, anybody can do it, right? Like anybody can put something out there on the internet. there's a critique of the internet, but uh, and we see plenty of people being paid to put dumb shit on the internet, but like the openness of it also at times de-establishes, right? The very thing that makes it actually um, democratic is also the thing that de-establishes it in elite spaces like education, or particularly higher education. So I think that that's part of the challenge is the yes, it will allow for those things, but it will also then be in some ways discredited because, well, you know, anybody can use an open AI. So how do we know this is useful? Or uh, yeah, so I think it's that blending of like already those critiques that exist for AI and ones that already exist for like open structures like OER and open access research.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting, I guess, kind of story about if you can't put a name to something now that it's been created by the public,
Mm,
then who is it by? Things
mm,
become anonymous as they're democratized.
yeah.
Uh-huh. And do you see any risks that might be associated with the use of OpenAI systems in education? Could something go wrong if they have like more open systems than now?
Um, mm, I mean, again, the ones that are just generally associated with AI of, you know, well, just I mean, it doesn't feel ridiculous, but it feels like something that people would be concerned about is, you know, if these tools are out there in the open for people to be able to like build and play with, manipulate, like to stop, you know, students or some whatever the future version of a paper mill is, uh, from creating OpenAI or using OpenAI systems to find ways to um, do the work, do the do the things that ideally students are supposed to be doing. Like we already know students are using you know AI in different ways for learning when they shouldn't be, but what happens when that's even more available to do like more specialized things? Essentially, like uh, what's to keep? And again, me personally, I I find this bullshit, but like I can hear faculty saying like, what's to keep a student from creating a cheater bot? You know, like a bot that's really honed to perfection to make sure that any assignment that's put in is just like uh, spits out the right thing with like the least amount of detection. Those types of things of like how it can be used to undermine the actual learning process because they would be, mm, yeah, more available, more no, uh, like somebody could take that open AI system and create their own site in which they can do that without having to worry about, you know, the chance that the owning company shuts it down because whatever they uh, shuts it down because they feel morally responsible for not undermining people's education, whatever the reason is. So yeah, I think there's that. Um, and probably because it's still you know a current issue with AI is like, are we all using the same AI with the same affordances and the same understanding of how that AI works? If we end up with lots of people able to go and use different tools, that- tools that are similar, but may, because of those customizations that happen, can end up being very different. Um, what does that mean for consistency or being able to understand what the different tools are, what the different OpenAI versions are putting out are able to make some like I think about how some, you can adjust the settings of like how creative the answers are, um how you can give it system prompts that, either purposely engage in that nudge it towards certain stances or allow for certain things to be certain uh what's the word I'm looking for? Like you can have censorship or um content limitations and some you can't. And so what happens when people are into the weeds on that in different tools and therefore we're getting very different outputs. In some ways it feels like another way of reproducing the echo chambers that that companies already do within like social media spaces.
So increasing access on one hand allows people to use it for use cases, but some might be concerned about using it for bad use cases. And also increased ubiquity of AI tools sort of increases the complexity of the space, what's available. There's more versions and different kinds of things. Now there's a lot more to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. And in promoting openness in AI and education, what steps do you think we need to take? I know you mentioned already that we need to have legal decisions about copyright laws surrounding generative AI outputs. Is there anything else from other stakeholders or also policymakers that we need to do on the way there?
I mean, gosh, that's a good question. So we have the like, well, I think it's hard because it's really like whatever they said, there's so besides the copyright status, like anything they say about how it's used, how it should be set up. So I guess, yeah, I mean, I feel like there might be some clear guidance about what's needed for, and this is probably more public institutions, what tools they can or should adopt, or anybody that's getting certain government funding for like for research grants in the like um about kind of their model selection and what those criteria might be. But in terms of so that's like specific institutions. I feel like in general with AI, it's much harder to say beyond that because as soon as they identify like here's the expected or required parameters, inevitably places elsewhere will have uh like there's going to be rogue AI, just like there's academic pirate networks, or pirate, Pirate Bay and other types of platforms. So yeah, so I think there's yeah, I would say there's guidance for institutions, um, but I don't know that there's a lot more than that, or at least I can't think of that. I can't think of anything in this moment.
That's all right. It's an ongoing conversation, so
Right?
we can keep an eye on this and also see how things develop as the landscape
Right?
changes. So that
Right?
brings us also to half an hour, and that's
Mm,
all my questions, really. Thank you so
mm,
much for sharing your
yeah,
insights. Really appreciate
my,
it.
my pleasure. Good to chat, and yeah, I'd love to see when the study's released. I'd love to see the results of it and learn more about kind of collectively what people are figuring out with all this.
Sounds good. Let's stay in touch, and
Awesome.
I'll keep you
All
updated
right.
about what happens.
Cool. Take care.
Take care. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.